So A Quiet Place Day One is one of my most anticipated movies of the year. Even though I had my reservations about this movie, you didn't have John Krasinski in the director's chair, you weren't following the Abbott family this time around, and with this movie taking place on day one, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about that. I thought John Krasinski did a really good job of handling that in the opening of part two, so I wasn't sure how you were going to be able to top that. And this time around, we have the director of Pig in the director's chair. This time around, we're following Sam, played by Lupita, as she finds herself trapped in New York City during the early stages of an alien invasion with an unexpected companion played by Joseph Quinn. Now, I might be in the minority when it comes down to this movie. As far as story goes, this one didn't work for me as much as it should have, or probably as much as it worked for a lot of people. I have some thoughts on this movie that kind of started grinding my gears as the movie progressed, but let's go ahead and get started with a couple of the positives that I have for this movie, because even though I wasn't the biggest fan when it came down to story, there are things about this movie that I really enjoyed, and I really loved that we were able to explore a little bit more when it came down to what this world is, where we are in this point of time. And with this movie taking place on day one, I thought they handled it as well as anybody else would possibly do, because even though we did get a glimpse of it in the opening of part two, this movie kind of explores it a little bit more and what it was like on the first day that these aliens attacked. And even though it's called day one, this movie spans about 4 or 5 days. I did try to keep count as far as how many days this movie took place. It took roughly about 4 to 5 days, so this movie could have easily been titled A Quiet Place Day 1 through 5. Michael Sarnowski was able to bring what John Krasinski brought to the first two movies. He is able to bring that sense of dread and terror that we had in the first two movies and just amplify it just a tad bit more. With it taking place within a couple of days, you are thrust into this situation with everybody else, only we are ahead of the characters. We are ahead of the curves. We know exactly how these creatures work. We know that if you stay silent, then they won't attack, but any little bit of noise will make them attack. And I know this is probably going to be one of the issues that some people have, but I didn't mind that they knew to stay quiet. Otherwise, the creatures would have attacked it, because think about it as a home invasion type of movie. If you are put into this situation, there is no way in hell that you're going to be making a lot of noise. Even if you are remotely scared and remotely terrified of what's actually going to happen, you know not to make a sound, otherwise whatever is hunting you is going to kill you. So I don't mind that they figured that out just a little bit more, because I think that is common sense to me. I think that is something that is going to not work for a lot of people, but for me, it actually worked in this concept because it's really not that hard. It's not rocket science. You know exactly what to do in this type of situation. Even if you are a little bit more freaked out on the inside, then I was able to let that slide just a little bit more. But even with that dread and terror that we have as the movie progresses, I thought they were able to handle the jump scares and the edge of your seat thrills a little bit better than they did in the first two movies, because even though I really enjoyed those movies, there were moments where you were able to feel like you were at the edge of your seat, but it never really fully worked for me. In here, there were some great scares that I thought felt earned, and even with the small relationship that was built between Lupita and Joseph, actually worked for me. Even though it took a little while to buy the companionship between those two, the performances that we get from both of them are just absolutely the highlight of the movie. With a lot of things literally thrown at them, they have to emote for a majority of this movie with their sense of fear and overcoming that fear, not knowing where their story are going to take them. And even with the new location that we get, with it being taking place in New York City, probably either one of the busiest and loudest or the loudest and busiest places in the world, I thought the setting in which this movie takes place was genius, and it actually worked because you are able to roam a little bit more further. You're able to do a little bit more in here. So the new location worked for me. I thought that is probably the genius thing about this movie. But moving into some of my negatives for this movie, The thing that holds this movie back from me loving it is the fact that I just did not care for Lupita's character's moral mission. As she's inching closer to death, the one thing that she wants to do is get a slice of pizza. Now, I've never been to New York, so I don't know how good the New York pizza is, but I don't know if it's as good as probably dying, because even though you know exactly what's happening around you, you see all these buildings just being torn down, just being crumbled to ashes, burnt down, your chances of finding a working pizzeria are probably slim to none. So that is where I was just not really interested in this movie. And that is really a bummer, because once we get to the emotional moments, there are a couple of emotional moments here that are thrown in here to care about these characters. I was just not able to get emotionally invested in these characters, because by the time that we reach the halfway point and the only thing that this character is obsessed with, I get what they were trying to go for, but it just didn't work for me on an emotional level. I was not able to gravitate to that situation as much as they wanted to. So that is the one thing that really made it go from me loving this movie to almost barely not liking this movie. But then another thing that also doesn't work for me is her service cat. And it's probably going to get me a lot of hate for it saying this, but it gets away so many times that at some point you just gotta cut your losses and let nature take its course, because it goes away for like 50% of this movie. And every single time that it gets away, it is inching closer to death. That even though I am somebody that is sensitive to animal deaths in movies, at some point I was just able to just say, you know what? Maybe it's best if these creatures just kill the animal, because it's not paying attention. And I feel like sometimes they just made it get loose in order for us to get some more suspenseful moments here and there. But I just wish they just kept this cat on a tighter leash, because it's literally like 5 seconds away from death, and it just escapes it in the most ridiculous ways that just didn't really work for me. And then moving on to the last thing that really didn't work for me, this is more of a slow paced character type of movie. You look at the trailers and you're seeing a lot of these action sequences thrown in the trailers, but what they don't show is really more of the slow burn approach that this movie takes. Now, I am somebody that really appreciates a slow burn. I think I am at that point in my life where I appreciate character stories more than action stories. So even though this movie takes that slow burn approach, it was just a little bit too slow, because it felt like it was trying to pad the runtime a little bit more. And at some point, you just got to get the characters progressing and going on a little bit more faster than they actually did. But overall, this is a fine little movie. It's worth seeing in theaters for the sound design that I thought worked in here to create a couple of great jump scares that will get you if you are somebody that doesn't really like jump scares. Overall, I'm going to go ahead and give A Quiet Place Day 1 a 5 out of 10. I enjoyed it when we were getting those suspenseful moments, but story wise, I was just not able to get behind this movie as much as they wanted me to. It's definitely one that you gotta experience in theaters, because I think you're going to have a lot of fun if you are a fan of this franchise, and you're probably going to get a couple of great scares here and there. But for me, I just wanted a little bit more than they actually gave us. But those are my thoughts on A Quiet Place Day 1. Have you guys checked it out? Is this your favorite? Is this your least favorite? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys for the next review.